Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with our journey, our discussions, our discoveries, and our explorations with respect to the recent releases made by the Criterion Collection during this year of 2022. And that brings us to that title, which has been released earlier this year by Criterion at spy number 1127. This is the work from the year 1991, and the name of the filmmaker is Mira Nair. And the name of this work is Mississippi Masala. Extraordinary work from the year 1991, and it is from the director Mira Nair and from also writer Suni Tarapurvara, and also it has a splendid cast, included in which are, for example, Sharmila Tagore and Roshan Seth and Charles S. Dutton and Sarita Chowdhury and Denzel Washington. And indeed, the characters played by Sarita Chowdhury and Denzel Washington, I think, form a real emotional bond that can be said to be a type of central anchor or core in the context of this wonderful, brilliant, exuberant work that is, from 1991, Mississippi Masala. What a film this is. It is, again, like many other films in the Criterion Collection, there's so much going on at once in this brilliant work. For example, if we think about the plot or story structure, we understand that for one of its primary components, this film takes place in Mississippi, and we have the character of Mina, this young woman who is played by Sarita Chowdhury, and she lives in this area of Mississippi with her parents, Roshan Seth and Sharmila Tagore characters, respectively, and they work in the context of, say, various, jobs or working life community, the Indian American community here in Mississippi, and we see them associated with their work, say, motels and also other parts of, say, their daily life and employment and daily living, etc., and family living as well. Through these various, say, situations or scenarios, and also through the development and opening and structure of the film, we understand a number of things about this family, and specifically about the character of Mina. So one of the things is they have come from Uganda, and they in Africa, and we understand that they had their roots, in particular the father, the Roshan Seth character, has his roots, his soul, his home, his heart, if you will, is with his place of, say, what he considers, what he believes to be his roots, his home. This is in Uganda. And they were, when Mina was a very young girl, when they were living in that part of the world, unfortunately for them, due to certain, say, political situations beyond their control, they had to leave their home. And they felt displaced. And so when, again, Mina was a young girl, the family had to leave and go to other parts of the world. First, according to Mina, they went to England, and then ultimately they settled. They came here and they settled in this part of the United States in Mississippi. And this is where Mina then grew up. And now we find her as a young woman, living with her parents, but also growing up and becoming more and more independent, and thus trying to discover and recognize aspects of herself in her own individual character and soul and spirit in the context of her family life, in the context of her own past and her own upbringing, as she describes it when she meets with another character, the Demetrius character. She describes herself as having been to many parts of the world, but she has never been to India. She recognizes herself, and she and others recognize themselves as being part of this Indian American community here in Mississippi, and then she and her family have these very close, intimate ties and feelings and emotional relationships with Uganda, and also certain people who are also there that we meet early on, but again, due to specific political circumstances, they become separated. And so here we have a number of things going on already. So we have the idea of Mina's life and the life of her family, and also her close-knit, say, circle of friends in this particular community, and how they interact with themselves, how they interact with others. And here we get some really brilliant, splendid scenes that are very touching, very funny, and very humorous. Also speak to very, I think, strongly rooted themes of Indian American, say, heritage, or how people in this community regard that heritage, and also regard specific aspects of what might be called, say, depictions or race-related notions or perceptions, even within the Indian American community. And this is regarded, or this is discussed by Mira Nair and others in the commentary track or in the supplemental sections as well. This notion too about how we have certain characters that we see sometimes briefly, sometimes quite directly in the film, how they have these notions or express the aspects of how they regard others within the community vis-a-vis, say, the complexion of skin color or skin tone, for instance. And so that becomes something that is, I think, an example of the way in which Mira Nair and company here are using the story of Mina and her, say, her own life story, and her own, in many ways, coming of age story, in a manner of speaking, and her meeting and her love story and her connections with the Demetrius character, Denzel Washington's character, how this is used as a backdrop, or how this is used in a way that is also that is also giving the filmmakers the opportunity to explore aspects of race and racially based identity aspects, and also how the family handles its own sense of roots and heritage, and how that is very much a dynamic thing, because it is dealing with aspects of the past while also trying to confront very direct and very relevant aspects of their current situation. And that is embodied in the family dynamics between Mina and her parents, and also Mina and the community, and also Mina and other aspects of other communities here in Mississippi. And one of those other aspects, or one of those communities, or one of those other characters that she meets is Demetrius, who is the Denzel Washington character. And here we have his story as well. He has his own family. He has his own, say, close-knit circle, and including people like Charles S. Dutton, etc. And we understand, too, that there is this interesting connection between him and the story of his emotional connection and love story and romance between him and Mina, how that develops, how that is further, say, supported, or how that is challenged in specific aspects of the story by, again, the way in which cultures and the meeting of cultures, how this is also providing an opportunity for Mira Nair and company to examine and explore aspects of race and racial relations in the context of the African American community, in the context of the Indian American community, and perceptions, self-perceptions, also perceptions from the external, how those might be quote-unquote accurate or inaccurate. And there's this idea, too, of how this forms the backdrop or context of relationship connections or communications that might be authentic, that might be somewhat based on, say, miscommunication, but how sometimes miscommunication can lead to further aspects of either further defining in a positive or maybe not so positive way concepts of what we might call race or racially based relationships. So here we have so much going on. Ultimately, of course, we have a story too that is very much an emotional, intimate, and touching one, And as I say, in many ways, this type of emotional core of the film, that is the story of the relationship between Demetrius, Denzel Washington's character, and Mina, Sarita Chowdhury's character. And this is so warm and moving and touching. It goes in many ways. It has different permutations, much like any relationship potentially has in daily life. You know, when one meets someone, it becomes this exciting and very exciting and very engaging thing. It also has the element of the unknown. What will happen next? Why is the other person reacting the way he or she does? And so this becomes part of the excitement of meeting. And I love this film as well, how it captures that sense of the excitement, the wonder, the joy of meeting someone and making a connection. This is a film about connections. This is a film about making connections, how connections are further forged, how connections are broken, how broken connections can be mended, or maybe how connections that are broken might never be mended at all, might be irreparable. How also sometimes connections that one might have or one might perceive to have could be based on actual things that are true, or maybe they are based on one's own misconceptions or misunderstandings that one doesn't even know about until many, many years after the fact. And this idea of connections or broken connections or mended connections or misunderstood connections or further defined, emotionally involved, intimate connections, etc., are presented in the context of, say, the relationship between Mina and Demetrius, the relationship between Demetrius and his family, the relationship between Demetrius and his friends, the relationship between Mina and her family, her parents, mother and father, and herself, and the relationship with other people in her community as well, etc., etc. Also with her father, Roshan Seth, and her mother, Shamir Tagore, their characters, how it relates back to what they left behind, or what they were forced to leave behind in Africa, in Uganda, and what that meant, and what that still means for the father character, and how that affects him and his relationship with Mina, and his own sense of self in living currently in Mississippi during this time. So there is so much going on here, while at the same time, or parallelly, or in fact very intimately, giving us a very warm and touching and romantic and moving and very human and funny, touching, and comic, also very emotionally involved story between these two characters, again set against the backdrop of so many things also happening at once. Ideas of communication and culture and race and identity, and that crosses the globe, that goes even in different parts of the world, but always remains close to one's heart. Home is where the heart is, in a manner of speaking, and that is certainly the case for this really beautiful, charming, and warm film. I'm so glad this is now found in the physical media collection of the Criterion collection in this new Blu-ray. This is the work from 1991, and that is Mississippi Masala. The Criterion collection has released this film, Mississippi Masala, on this new Blu-ray edition at spine number 1127, and it is purported to be based on a new 4K digital restoration and with 2.0 surround sound track with DTS HD master audio soundtrack. And just for your information, again, for purposes of today's video discussion, I've removed the booklet, and it is a staple booklet, by the way, and we'll get to that a little bit later. According to page 38, or on page 38 of this booklet, it says about the transfer in part, and I quote, Mississippi Masala is presented in its original aspect ratio of 1.85 to 1. This new digital transfer was created in 4K resolution, etc. And then it says further down, from the 35mm original camera negative. The original 2.0 surround soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm magnetic track. Please be sure to enable Dolby Pro Logic, decoding on your receiver to properly play the Dolby 2.0 surround soundtrack. And it also says transfer supervisors Ed Lockman, Mira Nair, and Giles Sherwood. And of course, Mira Nair is the director, and Ed Lockman is the director of photography of the film. So we have, therefore, this presentation for purposes of this new occasion, which is the release of this film in this year 2022 under this Criterion release. So what can we say about this? Now, I, again, unfortunately, am not at all an expert when it comes to the release versions of this film, Mississippi Masala. I have seen the film in the past, but unfortunately I don't have any strong frame of reference expertise enough to, say, properly evaluate or judge the qualities of this 4K restoration, or of this 4K presentation when compared to, say, other past releases. So unfortunately, I am incapable of making those comments, so I apologize for that. However, as I have said, I have seen this film a number of occasions prior to this Criterion release. And now watching this Criterion release and watching this 4K restoration version, what I can say, again, from my very limited vantage point, is that I am very, very struck and taken by how this looks and how this feels. And I can say, let's say, from the perspective of my own, say, subjective viewing experience and what I feel when I watch this film and how I interact with this film based on my understanding of what, say, the themes and concerns of this film are, I can say that it is a very overwhelmingly wonderful and beautiful viewing and listening experience all around. I'm very, very impressed with this, and I didn't feel in any way maybe distracted or anything like that. On the contrary, there are many moments of such poignant visual beauty. For instance, as some of you know who've seen the film, there are occasions where the film will go back and forth in a type of exploration of chronology and memory. And sometimes the looking back is to quote unquote happy times, happy memories, and maybe when compared to the present, or maybe when compared to other points in time which may be not so happy. And this feeling of looking back on happier memories, or maybe reconciling oneself with, say, not so happy memories, this is very much effectively also rendered within the visual palette of the film. Sometimes we have maybe dimmer portraits that maybe suggest a maybe bleaker experience, whereas happier memories might be highlighted with bright colors and bright lights, etc., lighting conditions, etc. And this is reflected very well in a number of those moments as they appear and as we watch them, as I saw them for purposes of this Criterion release. So that is an example of where this presentation really becomes so effective. There are other moments too of such visual beauty. It's commented upon in some of the other supplements as well, but there are some scenes of just they're enthralling, and they look so vivid and crystal clear here. And I maybe one that comes to mind as a great example is there's a scene involving a discussion between characters by the poolside. Yet at night, and the way that the light and the ripples of light touch upon the characters as they're speaking, it is magical. And when you see it in the context of the many versions, including this Criterion released 4K restoration version, it is utterly sublime, so lovely. And so those are some examples, I think, of where this film, the presentation, it works so well, and other scenes too, whether they be maybe some scenes involving maybe the outer landscapes of Uganda, or maybe some of the landscapes maybe by the bayou in Mississippi, or along driving in a backyard, or interiors, etc. It really glows, it really shines, it really comes forth in a vivid and effective fashion. So this is, I think, a very strong and quite effective viewing for purposes of the Criterion release. So well done for being able to do this. Now, in that spirit too, like with Criterion Collection releases elsewhere, we have another great set of supplements here. So what are these supplements? Let's go over them one at a time here. The first of such supplements or extras, we can say, is a commentary track. And this is described as being a commentary track from 2021, and this is with the director Mira Nair. And so here she is speaking. It's an optional audio commentary track. Splendid. utterly splendid. This is so great, and so I strongly recommend watching the film. And then after you had a chance to watch it, you can rewatch it, this time with a commentary track, because you hear her words and her perspectives. Excuse me. She speaks about, for example, about how a number of the moments of the film have to do with maybe personal experience, whether directly or maybe by extension, and how a lot of personal experience, either maybe her own personal experience or that of people around her and her community and her own family, might be reflected in some parts. For example, the scenes in Africa, the scenes in Uganda, Kampala, these scenes sometimes involve some family relationships as well. So this is, I think, very much a type of a family portrait or family affair in terms of this filmmaking, as well as telling this story, which has been constructed as well as a work of art. So those are very interesting details that emerge in the commentary track. As an example, speaking of the construction of the story, she also mentions working with the writer Suni Tarapurvala, and some of the contributions that she brought, the writer brought, and also the contributions that Mira Nair brought, and what their collaboration was. It's a really splendid collaboration. And indeed, we'll talk a little bit more about Suni Tarapurvala, because there's another great supplement that accompanies this release, speaking one-on-one with the writer. And then there's talk too about Uganda and the Uganda politics that is depicted at the start here. Idi Amin and the exile or exodus of South Asians, with South Asian population from the nation, which is directly relevant to the story of the character portrayed by Roshan Seth, Jay, and the family, why they have to leave their home and then go elsewhere in the world. And so we get the sense, as the scenes play themselves out again early on, also working with Roshan Seth, also working with other the great actors, Roshan Seth, Shamila Tagore, etc. And also the language of these languages, Swahili, and also working in these various conditions, and also trying to get a sense of, and what was so remarkable here about Mira Nair's film, and also her style and her cinema philosophy, is that she is able, and she acknowledges this in the commentary track, she is able to capture the absurd and the comic and even the humorous, even in scenes and moments that can be quite frightening and quite horrifying, and almost, if not directly, life and death type of situations. And so she's able to find this balance, which is, I think, very interesting indeed. So that's one aspect of the commentary track. Also, in terms of themes and the human condition, this idea of having to leave their home of Kampala, the family here, and this idea of the upending of their world, in particular from the context of the father, the patriarch, Roshan Seth character. And so, and Mira Nair also speaks about some of the details of the culture and also the people. And she sees there's a sense of what she refers to as politeness, a beautiful, earnest politeness as well in one specific detail, which is very interesting. And then, of course, this talks about the idea of the expulsion of the Asian population and what this meant in terms of their own paths, their own lives. She also mentioned something very interesting thing too, about how for a lot of these people that she became aware of through maybe direct, maybe anecdotal stories or the like from her, based on what she says here, Mira Nair says in the commentary track, for a number of them, they were able to find maybe financial and emotional satisfaction and success after they left. And so in many ways she heard how a number of these families, even if they were forced to leave their home of Uganda, they were still able to find financial success and happiness. And so in many ways they were grateful for these specific political and social circumstances that arose and that are part of the narrative and the opening of the film, which is a very interesting, maybe even a slightly ironic type of situation, at least as described by Mira Nair. So that's very interesting indeed. Also, she speaks too in this commentary track about working with the actors, in particular, for example, Sarita Chowdhury and the way in which, say, she brings a real Sarita Chowdhury brings us a lovely touch of the maybe the for lack of a better phrase, a pure or authentic nature, and maybe that might be, and that has to do a lot with maybe her background as an actor, maybe relatively speaking, when compared to say other actors who appeared here, like Denzel Washington. Maybe she was maybe not so experienced as others, but that didn't stop her from providing or giving this commanding, beautiful, and very emotional performance. And I think that has a lot to do with the talent and expertise of Sarita Chowdhury itself, and also has to do with the great relationship that appears to have been had between director and actor. So that's another thing to talk about. Speaking of actors, and she also speaks here. Mira Nair talks about working with Sharmila Tagore, who is, in her words, and I think rightly so, an icon of cinema. And she speaks too about how during the shooting, the location shooting, there would be a number of the extras who would be representing or portraying members of the Indian American community or population, say in Mississippi, the motel situation area. And maybe after shooting was over, there would be so many gifts showered upon this great icon, Sharmila Tagore, which is a lovely, lovely statement. Again, so many legends and so many icons of cinema here. It's really wonderful. Speaking of legends and icons and great masters and experts of the acting craft, we have, of course, Denzel Washington. And so Mira Nair speaks here about Denzel Washington and how he was at this time, very hot. In terms of popularity and critical acclaim, this was a very exciting time in his career. So maybe from her vantage point, it was a great joy for her to work with him, and that he also, chose to work with Mira Nair, and based on her past work, Salam Bombay, etc. And then also because this is a very interesting story involving race and racial relations and emotional cores to the actors and to the stories. And so I think that's a great story, a great revelation. Again, working with Denzel Washington, his contributions here are brilliant. His performance is commanding. Demetrius as a character is such a well-rendered character. And so these and other reasons, again, working with the actors, it's great. And then also, Mira Nair speaks to, there are some scenes, say, she mentions where she appears in the film itself, and she also mentions too about how there might be some racially based tensions even within the communities themselves. For instance, there are scenes in the film depicting the Indian American community, during like a wedding ceremony or social gathering, where these maybe veiled or maybe not so veiled comments about perceived distinctions that are made based on the complexion of skin, the skin tone, and how even that, or the skin complexion tone differences, would be the basis for some kind of maybe veiled or not so veiled attitudes of prejudice. So these scenes actually emerge in some aspects of the film as it's presenting. I think a very in-depth portrait of these various communities. And so Mira Nair does speak about this quite directly in the commentary track, as these aspects do appear in the film. And so that's one of the great strengths about how it has a multi-dimensionality, and it doesn't shy away from these somewhat sensitive and maybe even quite complex and quite difficult themes as well. It handles it so well and with such directness, and that it makes for some very thought-provoking moments indeed. So well done indeed for being able to present that and also to be able to talk about it in the context of the commentary track here. And then also this idea too about politics, the political statements that might be embedded in the film, or that might be part of the, maybe not necessarily message, but part of the tapestry or background of the film. There's the father's story. There's also the story of exile. There's also this idea of how this can also be as a type of comedy as well as a drama, comedy of exile, in the words of Mira Nair. And then speaking of father, there's also the relationship between parents and children, father and daughter relationship, mother and daughter relationship, very, very important here. And this goes to other aspects of the character of Mina, the Sarita Chowdhury character, about how she is. She says that she's never been to India. She's at a time in her life, her when she is wanting to maybe experience life on her own, maybe on her own terms, and maybe that has a lot to do with how she feels when she meets the Denzel Washington character. And so these are themes that emerge in the commentary track here as well. Also, Mira Nair talks about some lovely scenes. For example, there's a lovely romantic scene by the beach on the coastline, the bayou, and with the characters and the background. It's so romantic. And she says here in the commentary track about how, in many ways too, the film is about, or it's being made in the quote unquote stupor of love. That's her words. And she mentions too about how this coincided with feelings of romance that she herself, Mira Nair herself, was personally feeling at the time. So it coincided. So very interesting. Very interesting commentary on that section indeed. And then also going back to this idea of exile and the expulsion and being displaced, and going into the story of the father, etc. This idea of the discovery of home. What is home? What is the journey of home? And this has to do with the father's journey. This has to do with the mother's journey. This has to do with the daughter's journey, as well as Demetrius's journey. Everyone's journey. What is their sense of home, and how will they cope with it? And each character in the character's own way tries to deal with it, maybe succeeds or fails depending on what the expectations of that character is at the time. But in any event, this is the journey part of each character's arc, and it combines in the story, which is called Mississippi Masala. So the idea of, and a great juxtaposition here, Mira Nair says, the oppression of the past versus the liberation of the present. Wow. Home is where the heart is. Wow, wow, wow. Yes. Yes, I couldn't have said it better. Mira Nair, wow, a great type of punctuation that accompanies this lovely, lovely commentary track. So please check out the film with the commentary track if you can. It is so, so worth it. And continuing on with a discussion of what is included as part of the supplement. So now when you go to the menu, the main menu of the Criterion release, you can go to the supplement section. And here we have a number of supplements that can be made available. So in the sub-menu of that particular portion. So what do we have here? So first up, we have a conversation between Sarita Chowdhury and Devika Girish. And this is approximately 25 minutes. And here we have Devika Girish really providing great questions, and she's interviewing and having a lovely discussion with Sarita Chowdhury, who of course plays Mina, one of the main characters of the film, and one of the ingredients of the great success of this film, Mississippi Masala. And in this 25-minute or so discussion, she gives a little bit of background in terms of the character and her own approach. Again, she reveals how she had, relatively speaking, very little experience in terms of acting, to the point where she mentions here, prior to the audition process of this film, she had never auditioned before. So that shows, I think, the degree of her quote unquote, maybe relative quote unquote inexperience as an actor when compared, say, to others. But still, it didn't in any way distract or contradict from her wonderful, splendid performance that you see on screen. That's now, that is now embodied in this work for all time. This is a great, towering, beautiful, nuanced, emotional performance as Mina. Well done. And then she continues on working with the actors, working with Roshan Seth, working with Sharmila Tagore, working with Denzel Washington, and how that also brought their A game brought also her A game to the proceedings. It's lovely, great how actors or how artists inspire each other. Wonderful. And also she talks too about working in the motel environment, because her character, as we know, does have a number of her scenes, a not insignificant portion of her scenes taking place in and around the motel setting. So this is very important as well. And then also she talks a little bit about getting into character. She speaks about trying to get into that mindset, especially considering the age of the character, also the experience of the character, that we as viewers understand it from early on in the film, because we do have the early scenes involving the character as a younger girl. And so she has to think about that also in the context of her relationship with Uganda, also her relationship with Mississippi and the like. So she talks about the interesting and actually quite complex mindset that she had to find and maneuver in order to get into that correct sort of actor's headspace, in a manner of speaking. So that's a really great thing, getting into character. She does talk too about aspects of race, racial relations, racism that do emerge as part of the discussion or the thematic concerns of the film in Mira Nair and company. And then she talks too about working again with Denzel Washington, for example, the Bayou scene, which is another very famous scene, working with director Mira Nair, and how she, again, she admits how she was a newcomer. She was a young, early 20s newcomer, and then and how Mira Nair and others really were so generous and so supportive. And then she does talk about there's a scene involving, or there's a section involving Biloxi, so there's a discussion about those particular aspects of the film. Also, there are some scenes of intimacy, and also scenes of intimacy and eroticism and human sexuality. And so Sarita Chowdhury does speak about how those scenes might have been, or how those scenes were set up and shot. And also there's a discussion between the two here about how they really serve so well the themes and the character developments as we see them embodied here in Mississippi Masala. So, and I think I like that way that the discussion, Devika Girish brings it, about how it is a film that is political. It is also a film that is very erotic and romantic. And I love that type of description, because indeed it is many things. It is many things at once, which is one of the great strengths. And also they mentioned too the response of the film, how people recognized her in the street when she was walking, and how people said to her how this was such a great, a rewarding and such a supportive film for them. So all in all, this is a wonderful discussion. So please check it out if you can. Again, approximately 25 minutes. Yes. And then continuing on, we have a discussion with the writer, Suni Taraporvala, and this is described as being from 2022. And this is approximately 14 minutes. And she is the writer of the film. She speaks about her collaboration with Mira Nair, including this film, including Salam Bombay and others. And she mentions about how she, Suni Taraporvala, has this great has a kind of worldview or perspective philosophy that is very much in sync and aligned with that of Mira Nair. So I think that is a way of saying that they have this great working relationship and rapport, and it shows in the end product, does it not? This is a great, great film, and it shows through so vividly in the dialogue, in the structure, and the setup. Speaking of structure, what she says here, Tara Bavala says here about structure, she talks about research. Research is a very key component of this film. Talking about the structure of the film, maybe the kind of perspective that Mira Nair might have had at the story's inception versus how it was developed through their mutual collaboration. According to her here, she says that maybe Mira Nair first had the concept maybe focusing in on the father and the father's story vis-a-vis Kampala, the home country, Uganda. And maybe through the collaboration between director and writer, then the story emphasis and focus began to shift. Although the story of the father is still very, very critical to the concept of the final product film, the shift occurred, according to Tara Bavala. It shifted, maybe focusing more primarily on the romance or the love story between between Mina and Demetrius. So I think that again is an indication of the collaboration. They're the both the each story component is still there, of course. So, but I think according to Tarbovala here, she says that that emphasis that can show or that can provide a window into a telling of a story that involves many time periods, many places in the world, many stories, many continents, etc. So I think it's an indication of just how important this collaboration is, how important she is here as an artistic partner, a writer, of course, and again, the collaboration yielded such a wonderful result in this end product of Mississippi Masala. So wonderful, wonderful discussion with Suni Tarapovala. So please check it out if you can. Again, from 2022, approximately 14 minutes. And that's not all, because the next supplement we have is a one-on-one discussion with the director of photography, Ed Lockman. He discusses here in this one-on-one interview, described as being from 2022, approximately 16 minutes. He discusses his work on Mississippi Masala. He mentions a little bit of his background, how he has maybe a documentary background, or therefore that has a lot to do with his filming aesthetic. And I think, as he says, he mentions how maybe in that way that might have a lot to do with how much he felt in sync with Mira Nair in terms of her own background as well as a filmmaker, as well as the type of, while it's not a documentary, and while there are aspects of the film that have a style that is not necessarily like cinema verite documentary style per se, there is a way in which this idea of the approach or philosophy of the documentary filmmaking technique or style does avail itself very nicely when one is viewing a work like Mississippi Masala. And I think that is a point that he makes here very well. And also, he does talk about this idea of color photography in terms of the film stock, Kodak and Fujifilm, and this idea of the lenses, the use of the portrait lenses, and also this idea of depicting reality versus memories, which is also a very key component in terms of the look and feel and visual aesthetic. And so this is very key. Also, different places, different continents, right? Mississippi and Uganda. So these are different places. And so how that might also have had something to do with different choices depending on where place we're talking about, as well as what time period we're talking about. And also this idea of and again, it's mentioned in Mira Nair's commentary track. It is part of the thematic construction and concern of the film's content itself. It does appear in a lot of the scenes. This idea too of complexion, and how this emerges either in context of, say, very maybe organic discussions within the film, or maybe it occurs maybe in the context of discussions or scenes or comments that might be said to be quite prejudicial and even racist on the context of, say, that thematic discussion. And so in whatever context we're talking about, it's undeniable that this idea of the tone is very, very important. And Ed Lockman understood this and understands this, and he does mention this about how he really wanted to capture this and with a sense of earnestness and authenticity. And so I think that's a very, very intriguing component as well. This idea too of the observational versus the subjective, which is his phrase here. He speaks about an example too about the afternoon party. There's a moment where Charles S. Dutton's character engages with the frame in a very interesting way in terms of his arm, how it emerges. So he mentions that. He also mentions here, Ed Lockman does the pool scene, which is a very famous scene as well. And the idea too of rigidity or non-rigidity in shots in camera movement in order to maybe reflect this idea of a flow of emotion, which I think is so it's such a brilliant comment. So one of course it's an interview with so many brilliant comments, one of which is that, I think. So this is a great discussion with Ed Lockman, approximately 16 minutes, so please check it out if you can. And then we have another supplement, which is a discussion with Mitch Epstein, photographer and also in charge of production design on the film. This is also described 2022, approximately 18 minutes. And yes, he's credited as production designer for the film Mississippi Masala. Also, he speaks like others about documentary film background, about working with Mira Nair, about Salam Bombay, and the camera work. How the camera work is very much linked to the production design. This idea too of photography and the idea of addition and subtraction, which is very fascinating. This idea of production design and the look and aesthetic, taking into account the larger story about the traditions of still photography and the history of still photography, and how that has a lot to do with the depictions of the environments and the backgrounds and the buildings and the settings that we have on display here as part of the primary settings of the film. And research, the idea of, for example, researching motels, what the look and aesthetic of the motel would be in a situation like that, as we see in the story specific to Mississippi Masala, and the idea of various different continents, right? As we say, different continents, different places, Mississippi on the one hand, Uganda on the other. And this idea too, details like the signs, the way that the signage looks in various decors and settings. This is very important. Also, he mentions a detail which, and that he also mentions there's a personal connection, that he had been married to Mira Nair. So they did have this type of connection. So in any event, there is a personal and professional connection, and he does speak about both and his contributions in the context of this great film, Mississippi Masala. So here is another great conversation, this time with Mitch Epstein, approximately 18 minutes. So that concludes the discussion of what we find in the supplement section of this Criterion release. But now let's go to the actual design, the cover art, etc. And so look at this great cover art. Wow, look at this great collage look with the visual aesthetic, the use of color, and this is carried over into the back of the cover art design in this casing, and then also we have it reflected in the booklet, and it is a staple booklet, and what a wonderful booklet it is. Before we go any further, let me say that the art is credited to art director Sarah Habibi, Eric Skillman, designer Masaki Koike. So wow, well done. It's a lovely design. Again, one of the great aspects of the physical media releases, of course, from Criterion and others, of course, is the cover art. And my goodness, this is lovely, very lovely indeed. And then going on with my praise for this release, another thing I must give praiseworthy comments to is the booklet. I love this booklet. It is a staple booklet. Yes, it is approximately close to 40 pages of booklet goodness. So thank you very much for that. I'm a huge fan of the booklet form, and one of the main reasons that I am a fan of the booklet form is that it can afford a number of writings, robust writings, and this is no exception to that. What a great series of writings here. First, we have the wonderful essay from Bilal Qureshi, The Ocean of Comings and Goings. I read this a number of times. I learned so much from this. It touches on all the things that one is looking for in a great essay with Criterion releases. And so if you're looking for the necessary information about the career of the director, the trajectory of the filmography, Mississippi Masala, how it fits into that context, also the themes and concerns, social, political, and emotional context of the film, etc., etc. Wow, what a great essay. So please check this out if you can. Again, The Ocean of Comings and Goings. And that's not all, because we also have Director's Journal, Mira Nair. And this is this is described as being published here for the first time, excerpted from a diary that Mira Nair kept while pitching, doing documentary-style research for, offering ideas for the writing of, and casting Mississippi Masala. Yes, this is a very fascinating glimpse into a number of the details that are referred to here. Very frank, very honest, and quite perhaps shockingly frank in a number of ways, as it might be described here when you read through it. In all, this is so valuable as a type of historical document, as well as being further insight and indications of the approach of Mira Nair during the context of this film, and more information about the background details. Wow, wonderful. Wonderful inclusion here from the director's journal excerpt. So please check this out as well if you can. It is wonderful, and it is a great way to celebrate this film in this context of release with this booklet. So please check it out. Again, with the essay and these writings, my recommendation is watch the film first. And after you've seen the film, you can enjoy reading these writings as they're included here. So please do so. I hope you enjoy them, my friends. That and the release and the supplements and the commentary track. This is another strong one this year. What a great release this is from Criterion. If you haven't seen the film yet, please, please do. It is so worth it. And I think Criterion has done a splendid job, a phenomenal job of making it so presentable and so accessible for I hope as many people to see it as possible, because it is so worth it, my dear friends. This is the work which is Mississippi Masala. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very, very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.